Donald Trump has once again been talking about India and Prime Minister Narendra Modi, calling him a great friend and insisting that the United States and India will always be close partners. But at the same time, his administration has imposed steep tariffs, including punitive duties directly tied to India's energy trade with Russia. This mix of warm language and hard policy leaves a complicated picture of where U.S.-India relations stand today. Earlier this year, the U.S. imposed reciprocal tariffs on Indian goods, followed by an additional 25% penalty tariff because of India's continued imports of Russian oil. That pushed the tariff burden on many Indian exports up to 50%, a move that sent shockwaves through New Delhi. The official reasoning was to pressure India to reduce its reliance on Moscow and align more closely with U.S. strategic priorities. On the surface, it was about trade, but underneath, it was about geopolitics. Yet, alongside this tough stance, Trump has gone out of his way to call Modi a great prime minister and a great friend. He even placed a call to Modi on his birthday, a symbolic gesture meant to highlight personal warmth. Modi, in return, responded with gratitude, saying he deeply appreciated Trump's sentiments and that the strategic partnership between India and the United States remains strong and forward-looking. So while the rhetoric is filled with friendship, the policies themselves tell a more complicated story. The tariffs hit Indian exporters particularly hard, affecting textiles, jewelry, and other consumer goods. At the same time, U.S. businesses that depend on Indian imports are beginning to feel the squeeze, with higher costs and supply chain disruptions looming. It is not just about economics, it is about public opinion. In India, there is growing frustration that Washington is using coercive tactics while speaking of friendship. Many argue that friendship cannot mean being forced into economic and political concessions. Modi's government has to weigh the costs carefully, especially with domestic businesses pressing for relief. Trump himself has admitted that the tariffs caused a rift, calling it a big deal. For a U.S. president to acknowledge this so openly suggests that Washington knows the risks of alienating India. After all, India has consistently maintained a policy of strategic autonomy, choosing to balance relations with multiple powers rather than align fully with any single one. From India's perspective, buying oil from Russia at discounted prices is not just a matter of politics, but also of national interest and economic survival. Washington's demands to reduce such imports are seen in New Delhi as encroaching on its sovereignty. Trade talks, however, are back on the table. Indian officials describe recent discussions as positive and forward-looking. There is cautious optimism that the United States may ease some of the penal tariffs, especially the additional 25% duty tied to Russian oil imports. If that happens, it could create space for a broader trade agreement. But optimism is not certainty, and mistrust remains. When rhetoric of friendship does not align with economic policy, suspicion tends to grow. The larger geopolitical context cannot be ignored. The United States views India as a key partner in the Indo Pacific, especially in counterbalancing China's rise. Both countries also benefit from defense cooperation, technology partnerships, and intelligence sharing. But these are fragile foundations if one side feels pressured or cornered. At the same time, India's importance as a massive market and a growing economic powerhouse means Washington cannot afford to let the relationship collapse into hostility. For New Delhi, alienating the United States is equally risky, but so is appearing to bow to external pressure. The future of this relationship could play out in several ways. The most hopeful scenario is partial reconciliation. Washington eases the extra tariffs while India makes some symbolic gestures, perhaps by diversifying energy imports or opening certain trade sectors. Another possible outcome is a tense but manageable status quo, where the relationship remains strained but functional. The more dangerous path is escalation, with both sides hardening positions and retaliating. In that case, India might deepen its ties with Russia or accelerate trade partnerships with other powers, weakening U.S. influence in South Asia. What makes this all so fascinating is the clash between language and policy. Trump's words are friendly, almost affectionate. Modi responds in kind, stressing deep partnership. Yet the actions, the tariffs, the penalties, the criticisms, paint a very different picture. Friendship in diplomacy is not about warm phrases, but about whether actions match promises. The gap between words and deed may decide whether the India-US relationship grows stronger or weaker in the years ahead. Despite the friction, both sides know how much this partnership matters. India is one of the world's fastest-growing economies, a hub of talent, technology, and markets. For the U.S., access to India's growth story is vital. On the security front, both nations face challenges from China's rise and instability in Asia, making cooperation essential. On global issues like climate change, supply chain resilience, and energy security, the U.S. and India cannot afford to be at odds for too long. The stakes are simply too high. In the coming months, watch closely for signs of whether Washington reduces the penalty tariffs and whether India makes any adjustments to its energy imports from Russia. Keep an eye on whether trade negotiations deliver results or stall once again. And most importantly, pay attention to public sentiment in both countries, because leaders are often constrained by the pressures of domestic politics as much as by foreign strategy. Trump is trying to project strength while keeping ties with Modi alive. Modi is trying to hold his ground without letting the relationship break down. Between words of friendship and acts of frustration, the future of one of the world's most important bilateral partnerships will be shaped. And as always, the outcome will not only affect India and the United States, but the balance of power across Asia and the world. If you found this analysis valuable, make sure to like, subscribe, and stay tuned, because the story of India and the United States is just beginning another dramatic chapter, and we'll be here to break it down for you.